The text came at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was pulling into our driveway after another 12-hour shift at the construction site. Working late again. Don't wait up. Sam. I stared at the screen of my phone, engine still running, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not because of what the message said, but because of what it didn't say. No love you, no sorry, just a flat dismissal. Like I was some roommate she barely tolerated. My name's Jack Morrison, and I've been married to Samantha for 8 years. 8 years of watching her climb the social ladder at Morrison and Associates Real Estate, while I stayed planted firmly in my work boots, building the houses she sold to people who looked right through me at company parties. I sat there in my pickup truck, staring at our perfectly manicured suburban home with its white picket fence and matching shutters. Everything about it screamed success and respectability. Everything about it was a lie. The funny thing about being married to someone for 8 years is you start to notice patterns, like how Samantha's late nights always coincided with her business partner Corey's schedule, or how she'd started wearing perfume to work, expensive stuff I'd never smelled on her at home, or how she'd suddenly become very interested in keeping her phone face down during dinner. I'm not stupid. I dropped out of college to work construction, sure, but that doesn't mean I can't add 2 and 2. The problem was, every time I tried to bring it up, Samantha would flip it around on me. Suddenly, I was the paranoid one, the jealous husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. "You're being ridiculous, Jack," she'd say, rolling her eyes in that particular way that made me feel about 2 inches tall. "Corey and I are business partners. That's it. Maybe if you focused more on your own career instead of obsessing over mine, you'd understand how professional relationships work." Professional relationships. Right. I turned off the engine and sat in the growing darkness, watching the neighbors' windows glow with warm yellow light. The Hendersons were probably sitting down to dinner. The Washingtons were likely helping their kids with homework. Normal families doing normal things. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my world tilt sideways. It was Samantha and Corey at Vincenzo's, the upscale Italian place downtown. They were sitting close together in a corner booth, her hand resting on his arm, both of them laughing at something. The timestamp showed 7:35 p.m., 8 minutes before she'd texted me about working late. Below the photo was a message. "Thought you should know. A friend." I stared at the screen until the image burned itself into my retinas. There was my wife, my partner, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me, playing house with another man while lying to my face about it. For a moment, I just sat there feeling sorry for myself. Poor Jack Morrison, the construction worker who wasn't good enough for his ambitious wife. Poor Jack, who worked his tail off to pay for her designer clothes and spa treatments and fancy car, only to get cheated on for his trouble. Then something shifted inside me. The self-pity burned away, replaced by something harder and sharper. I'd spent 8 years being the understanding husband, the supportive partner who didn't make waves. I'd swallowed every condescending comment, every eye roll, every subtle dig about my blue-collar job and community college education. Well, congratulations to Samantha and Corey. They'd finally pushed the wrong button. I got out of the truck and walked toward our front door, my mind already working. See, the thing about construction is that it teaches you to think systematically. You can't just slap a roof on a house and hope it stays up. You need a foundation. You need a plan. You need to build something that'll last. And right now, I was planning to build the most spectacular collapse my cheating wife had ever seen. I unlocked the front door and stepped into our pristine living room, with its white leather furniture and abstract art that cost more than my truck. Everything was exactly where Samantha had placed it, every throw pillow precisely arranged, every surface spotless. It looked like a magazine spread. It felt like a museum, time to redecorate. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called in sick to work. Then I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started making lists. List number 1, everything I knew for certain. Samantha was having an affair with Corey Patterson, her business partner at the real estate firm. They'd been meeting at Vincenzo's and probably other places. She'd been lying to me about working late. She thought I was too stupid to figure it out. List number 2, everything I suspected. This had been going on for months, maybe longer. Some of her friends probably knew about it. Her sister Rebecca definitely didn't know. She'd always been straight with me. Corey was married too, which meant his wife Linda was probably in the dark, just like I'd been. List number 3, resources and assets. Our joint checking account, which I had equal access to. Our house, which was in both our names. My pickup truck, which was paid off, and mine alone. My friendship with Pete Kowalski, who owned the hardware store and used to be a cop before he retired. My complete and detailed knowledge of how Samantha's mind worked. List number 4, goals. This was the important one. I didn't want to hurt Samantha physically. I'm not that kind of guy, and besides, that would just make me the villain in her story. I didn't want to break any laws. I'd seen enough guys go down that road, and it never ended well. What I wanted was something much more satisfying. I wanted her to experience the same humiliation and betrayal she'd been dishing out to me. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have your life turned upside down by someone you trusted. Most of all, I wanted her to know that she'd underestimated me. Badly. The front door opened at 11:30 a.m., earlier than usual. I heard Samantha's heels clicking across the hardwood floor, heard her drop her purse on the hall table with that particular sigh she always made when she was annoyed about something. "Jack?" she called out. "What are you doing home?" "Kitchen," I called back, not moving from my spot at the table. She appeared in the doorway wearing her navy business suit and a guilty expression that she was trying to hide behind irritation. "Are you sick? You look fine." "I am fine," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Just taking a personal day. How was your late night at the office?" Something flickered in her eyes. "Fine. Busy. We had a lot of paperwork to catch up on." She moved to the coffee maker, keeping her back to me. "You really should have called if you were going to be home. I could have adjusted my schedule." "To spend time with your husband? How thoughtful." She turned around, and now the irritation wasn't hidden anymore. "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us, the photo from last night still displayed on the screen. "It means I know about Vincenzo's. I know about Corey. I know about all of it." The color drained from Samantha's face, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. That was always her strength, thinking on her feet, adapting to new situations. It's what made her good at real estate and apparently at cheating. "Jack, I can explain." "Please do." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "This should be interesting." She sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table like she was conducting a business meeting. "It's not what you think. Corey and I were discussing the Henderson property over dinner. It's a complicated sale, and we needed privacy to go over the details." "Uh-huh. And the hand-holding?" "We weren't—" She stopped, realizing she was about to lie about something I had photographic evidence of. "Look, maybe it looked inappropriate, but—" "Samantha." I said her name quietly, and something in my tone made her stop talking. "Do you remember what you told me on our wedding day, about honesty being the foundation of marriage?" She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "So let's be honest. You're having an affair with Corey Patterson. You've been lying to me about it, and you think I'm too stupid to figure it out." I picked up my phone and slid it back into my pocket. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" For a moment, she looked almost relieved, like she was glad the secret was finally out. Then her expression hardened, and I saw the real Samantha emerge, the ambitious, calculating woman who'd climbed from small-town nobody to successful businesswoman in less than a decade. "What do you want, Jack? Money? The house? Just name your price and let's get this over with." I stared at her, genuinely shocked. Not by the admission, I'd already known about the affair, but by how quickly she'd jumped from denial to negotiation, like our 8-year marriage was just another real estate deal to be closed. "You think this is about money? Isn't it always?" She was back in control now, or thought she was. "Look, I'll be fair. You can keep the truck, and I'll give you enough cash to get an apartment somewhere. We'll file no-fault divorce papers, split things down the middle, clean and simple." Clean and simple. Like I was a problem to be solved, a mess to be cleaned up. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at our backyard with its perfectly maintained lawn and flower beds. Everything neat and orderly and fake. You know what the funny thing is, Sam? I actually thought about that. Just taking the money and walking away. It would be the smart play, right? The mature thing to do. "It would," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I turned around and smiled at her. Not a nice smile, not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that should have been a warning. But then I remembered something. You always said I wasn't smart enough to play in your league, that I didn't understand how the world really worked. I walked back to the table and leaned down, putting my hands flat on the surface. "Well, congratulations, honey. You're about to get an education in exactly how smart your blue-collar husband really is." The relief vanished from her face. "Jack, don't do anything stupid." "Stupid?" I laughed, and even I was surprised by how cold it sounded. "Sweetheart, I'm just getting started. And trust me, there's nothing stupid about what I have planned." After Samantha left for work, presumably to warn Corey about our conversation, I drove across town to Pete's Hardware. Pete Kowalski was one of the few people who'd treated me the same before and after I married Samantha. He was also the closest thing I had to a best friend, which said something depressing about my social life over the past few years. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and Pete looked up from behind the counter where he was sorting through invoices. He was a big guy, built like the linebacker he'd been in high school, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. 20 years as a cop had given him a radar for trouble, and I could see it activating as he took in my expression. "Well, well," he said, setting down his paperwork. "Jack Morrison, in the middle of a workday. Either you're finally taking my advice about work-life balance, or something's wrong." "Something's wrong," I admitted, walking over to lean against the counter. "Sam's cheating on me." Pete's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, anger, and finally a kind of grim satisfaction. "With the pretty boy from her office? You knew?" "I suspected. Linda Patterson's been asking around about her husband's schedule, and your wife's name kept coming up." Pete shook his head. "I'm sorry, Jack. I should have said something. Would I have believed you?" He considered that. "Probably not. You had to see it for yourself." Pete studied my face. "So what's the plan? Please tell me you're not going to do anything that'll land you in jail." "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "But I'm not just rolling over and taking it either. She thinks I'm some kind of pushover who'll just slink away quietly. Time to prove her wrong." Pete grinned, and for a moment he looked like the troublemaker he'd been before he'd become a cop. "What do you need?" "Information, mostly, and maybe a few supplies." We spent the next hour planning. Pete still had contacts in various places around town: the phone company, the bank, City Hall. Nothing that would get anyone in trouble, but enough to give me the intelligence I needed for what came next. By the time I left Pete's store, I had a much clearer picture of my wife's activities. Corey Patterson had been making regular reservations at Vincenzo's for the past 4 months, always for 2 people, always on nights when Samantha claimed to be working late. He'd also been spending money at jewelry stores and lingerie shops, purchases that definitely weren't for his wife Linda, who was a practical woman with simple tastes. More interesting was what Pete's contact at the bank had revealed. Samantha had opened a separate savings account 3 months ago, one that wasn't connected to our joint finances. She'd been moving small amounts of money into it regularly, nothing big enough to trigger my attention, but it added up. She was planning her exit strategy, probably had been for months. The realization should have hurt, but instead, it just made me angry. She'd been planning to leave me while still playing the loving wife at home, still expecting me to pay for her car, her clothes, her lifestyle, while she built a nest egg for her new life with Corey. Well, two could play that game. My first stop was our bank, where I withdrew half the money from our joint checking account, my legal right as a joint account holder. I opened my own account at a different bank and deposited the money there. Not enough to cause immediate problems, but enough to get Samantha's attention. My second stop was the phone company, where I added a detailed billing feature to our family plan. Starting immediately, I'd receive itemized records of all calls and texts made from Samantha's phone. Again, completely legal since I was the primary account holder. My third stop was a locksmith. I got home before Samantha and spent the afternoon making subtle changes around the house. Nothing dramatic, I wasn't ready to show my hand yet, but I moved a few things around, changed some passwords, and generally started establishing the fact that this was my house too, not just hers. When Samantha's car pulled into the driveway at 6:15 p.m., I was sitting in the living room reading a book. She came through the front door like she was walking on eggshells, clearly expecting another confrontation. "Hi," she said carefully, setting down her purse. "Hi yourself. How was work?" She blinked, obviously thrown by my casual tone. "Fine. Busy. The Henderson sale is moving forward." "That's nice." I turned a page in my book without looking up. "By the way, I stopped by the bank today. Moved some money around. Hope that's okay." I felt her freeze more than saw it. "What kind of money movement?" "Just some personal stuff. Nothing that affects our joint expenses." I glanced up and smiled. "Don't worry about it." She wanted to ask more questions, I could see it in her face, but she was probably afraid of starting another argument. Instead, she went upstairs to change clothes, and I heard her moving around up there for longer than usual, probably checking to see if anything else had changed. Dinner was awkward. Samantha kept trying to gauge my mood, clearly confused by my apparent calm. She'd probably expected me to be angry or hurt or demanding answers. Instead, I made small talk about my day and asked about hers, just like always. "Jack," she said finally, pushing food around on her plate. "About this morning." "What about it?" "I think we should talk, really talk, about where we go from here." I set down my fork and looked at her. Really looked at her, taking in the expensive haircut and the designer blouse and the guilty expression she was trying to hide behind concern. "You know what, Sam? I think you're right. We should definitely talk about where we go from here." I picked up my fork again. "But not tonight. I'm still processing everything. Let's give it a few days, let the dust settle. Then we'll figure out our next steps." She nodded, looking relieved. "That sounds reasonable." Reasonable. That was me, all right. Reasonable Jack Morrison, who never made waves or caused problems, who could be counted on to handle everything maturely and quietly. After dinner, Samantha went upstairs to take a bath, her usual routine when she was stressed. I cleaned up the kitchen and then sat down at my laptop to do some research. Corey Patterson had a very active social media presence, which was going to make my job much easier. He posted constantly about his business successes, his expensive toys, his nights out on the town. He also had a habit of checking in at restaurants and bars, creating a nice digital trail of his activities. More importantly, he had a big mouth and a bigger ego. His posts were full of barely veiled references to his exciting new relationship and his beautiful business partner. Anyone who knew him and Samantha could probably connect the dots without much effort. I scrolled through months of posts, taking screenshots and building a timeline. By the time Samantha came downstairs in her robe, I had a pretty complete picture of their affair, when it started, where they went, how serious it had gotten. "What are you working on?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Just some research for a project," I said, closing the laptop. "Nothing exciting." She hovered for a moment, clearly wanting to know more, but I just smiled at her and went back to my book. After a few minutes, she gave up and went to watch TV. That night, as we lay in bed with the familiar distance between us, I listened to Samantha's breathing and planned my next move. She thought she was in control of this situation. She thought she could manage me the same way she managed her real estate deals, with careful negotiation and strategic concessions. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. The beauty of being married to someone for 8 years is that you know exactly which buttons to push. Samantha prided herself on being sophisticated, successful, and above all, in control. Her reputation in the real estate community was everything to her. It was how she measured her worth, how she defined herself. So naturally, that's where I decided to apply pressure first. I started small. On Wednesday morning, I created a fake email account and sent a message to the Morrison & Associates company newsletter mailing list. Nothing dramatic, just a friendly reminder that the annual company picnic was coming up, and that everyone should feel free to bring their special someone along. I made sure to mention how nice it would be to meet everyone's partners, especially the ones they'd been keeping secret. The email was vague enough to seem innocent, but specific enough to make certain people uncomfortable. Like, say, business partners who were sneaking around behind their spouses' backs. Then I drove to Vincenzo's and had a conversation with Maria, the hostess who'd been working there for 15 years and knew everyone in town. I told her I was planning a surprise party for Samantha and wanted to know about her favorite table, her usual orders, that sort of thing. Maria was happy to help, and in the process, she confirmed what I already knew. Samantha and Corey had been regulars for months, always requesting the same corner booth, always acting like a couple. "Such a lovely pair," Maria gushed. "So romantic the way he orders for her and holds her hand across the table. You're lucky to have such a devoted wife, Mr. Morrison." I smiled and thanked her, then asked if she'd be willing to help me coordinate the surprise. She was delighted to be part of it. By Thursday, the pressure was starting to show. Samantha came home looking frazzled, her usual composure cracking around the edges. "Everything okay?" I asked, looking up from the newspaper. "Fine," she said, but her voice was tight. "Just some office drama, people gossiping about nothing." "What kind of gossip?" She hesitated, clearly debating how much to tell me. "Someone's been spreading rumors about inappropriate relationships between business partners. It's ridiculous, but you know how people talk." I said, turning back to my newspaper. "That does sound ridiculous. I'm sure it'll blow over." That evening, while Samantha was in the shower, her phone buzzed with a text message. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The detailed billing records I'd requested were already showing me everything I needed to know. Corey had been texting her constantly all day, and the frequency suggested he was panicking about something. Good. Friday brought the next phase of my plan. I took another personal day and drove to Linda Patterson's workplace, a small accounting firm downtown. Linda was a nice woman who'd always been friendly to me at company events, back when Samantha still bothered to include me in her professional life. She deserved better than what Corey was doing to her. I waited in the parking lot until her lunch break, then, accidentally, bumped into her as she was leaving the building. "Linda." "What a coincidence," I said, putting on my best surprised expression. "How are you doing?" "Jack, hi." She seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "I'm well, thanks. How's Samantha?" "She's great, working hard as always. You know how it is, all those late nights at the office." I paused, as if something had just occurred to me. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask, does Corey work late as much as Sam does?" She's always talking about how dedicated he is to the business. Something flickered in Linda's eyes. Corey's been working a lot of evenings lately, yes. Big projects, he says. Well, I guess that's the price of success, right? At least they have each other for company during those long hours. Probably makes the work more bearable. Linda's smile faltered slightly. Yes, I suppose it does. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing important, but I could see the seeds of doubt taking root. Linda was a smart woman. She'd start paying attention now, asking questions, and when she did, she'd find the same things I had. That afternoon, I made one more stop, the local newspaper office. The weekly paper was small-town journalism at its finest, which meant they loved gossip as much as actual news. I spoke with Janet Coleman, the editor, about placing an advertisement. I want to do something special for my wife, I told her. A public declaration of love, you know. Something that shows the whole town how much she means to me. Janet was delighted to help. We worked together on the wording, and by the time we were done, I had a half-page ad scheduled to run in next week's edition. It read, "To my beautiful wife Samantha, thank you for 8 wonderful years of marriage. Thank you for your loyalty, your honesty, and your devotion. Thank you for always putting our relationship first, no matter what temptations might come your way. You are everything a husband could ask for, and I am grateful every day that you chose me. All my love, Jack." The ad was scheduled to run on Wednesday, the same day as the company picnic I'd mentioned in my email. By then, everyone in town would know about Samantha and Corey's relationship, and my public declaration of love would seem either tragically naive or devastatingly sarcastic. I was betting people would figure out which one pretty quickly. That evening, Samantha was more agitated than I'd ever seen her. She paced around the living room, checking her phone constantly, starting conversations and then abandoning them halfway through. "Jack," she said finally, stopping in front of my chair, "I think we need to talk about our situation. Soon." "What situation is that?" She stared at me, clearly frustrated by my apparent obliviousness. "You know what situation. What we discussed earlier this week." "Oh, that." I set down my book and looked at her. "What about it?" "I think it would be best for both of us if we moved forward with making some changes, sooner rather than later." "What kind of changes?" "Jack, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Her voice was strained. "We both know this marriage isn't working anymore. We both know it's time to move on." I stood up and walked over to her, close enough to see the guilt and fear and frustration warring in her expression. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You're right," I said softly. "This marriage isn't working anymore, and it is time for some changes." I reached out and touched her cheek, and she flinched slightly. "But not the kind of changes you're thinking of." "What do you mean?" I smiled, the same cold smile I'd given her earlier in the week. "I mean that you started this game, Sam. But I'm going to finish it." Before she could respond, I walked past her and headed upstairs, leaving her standing alone in the living room with her phone and her guilt and her growing realization that she'd seriously underestimated her husband. The real show was about to begin. Monday morning brought the first crack in Samantha's composure. She came downstairs for breakfast, looking like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. "The company picnic is Wednesday," she announced without preamble, pouring coffee with shaking hands. "That sounds fun," I said, not looking up from my newspaper. "Are partners invited?" She froze, coffee mug halfway to her lips. "What?" "Spouses, I mean. Are spouses invited?" I glanced up innocently. "I'd love to come if you want the company. It's been a while since I've seen your coworkers." That's not... It's more of a professional thing," she stammered. "Oh well, maybe next time." I turned back to my paper. I'm sure you and Corey will represent the company well. The coffee mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending ceramic shards and hot coffee everywhere. Samantha stared at the mess like she couldn't quite process what had happened. Careful, I said, standing up to get the broom. Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt. As I cleaned up the broken pieces, I could feel her watching me, trying to figure out how much I knew and what I was planning. The uncertainty was eating her alive, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. Tuesday brought the next phase. I spent the morning at Pete's hardware store, picking up supplies and putting the finishing touches on my plan. Pete took one look at my list and whistled low. You sure about this, Jack? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls. First to Maria at Vincenzo's, confirming our arrangement. Then to Janet at the newspaper, making sure my ad would run as scheduled. Finally, to a few of Samantha's co-workers, people I'd met at company parties over the years, people who liked me and had always seemed uncomfortable with how Samantha treated me in public. I didn't say much to any of them, just mentioned that I was planning a surprise for Samantha and that they might want to pay attention at the company picnic. Word would spread. It always did in a small town. By Wednesday morning, Samantha was a wreck. She'd spent the previous evening on the phone with someone, Corey, presumably, having hushed urgent conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room. She'd barely eaten dinner and had tossed and turned all night. Maybe I should skip the picnic, she said over breakfast, her voice strained. I'm not feeling well. That would be a shame, I said, especially after all the planning that's gone into it. She looked at me sharply. What planning? Oh, you know. Food, entertainment, surprises. I smiled. I think it's going to be a day no one forgets. The company picnic was held at Riverside Park, a sprawling green space on the edge of town with picnic tables, a playground, and a small amphitheater. By the time I arrived, uninvited but not unwelcome, the party was in full swing. I spotted Samantha immediately. She was standing near the food tables with Corey, both of them looking tense and uncomfortable. They were trying to maintain professional distance, but their body language screamed guilty couple. Jack! Linda Patterson appeared at my elbow, looking surprised but pleased. I didn't expect to see you here. Last-minute decision, I said. Thought I'd surprise my wife. Linda's expression shifted slightly. Over the past few days, she'd obviously been doing some investigating of her own. The doubt I'd planted had grown into suspicion, and suspicion had led to discovery. I could see it in her eyes, the same hurt and anger I'd felt when I first learned the truth. Yes, she said quietly. I imagine there will be quite a few surprises today. Across the park, Samantha had spotted me. The color drained from her face, and she grabbed Corey's arm, whispering something urgent in his ear. He looked over at me and paled as well. Good. Let them sweat. I spent the next hour mingling, making conversation, being the friendly, down-to-earth guy everyone remembered from previous company events. I talked to Samantha's boss about the real estate market. I complimented the office manager on her potato salad. I asked the new junior associate about his recent engagement, and all the while, I could feel Samantha watching me, waiting for the other shoe to drop. At 2 p.m., Maria from Vincenzo's arrived with a special delivery, a beautiful cake decorated with 2 intertwined hearts and the words, "Congratulations on your special relationship," written in elegant script. She made a big show of presenting it to Samantha and Corey, gushing about how romantic their regular dinner dates were and how happy she was to help celebrate their love. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in the immediate area stopped as people processed what they'd just heard. Samantha looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground, while Corey's face had gone from pale to bright red. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Samantha said weakly. Oh no, dear, Maria said cheerfully. Mr. Morrison explained everything when he ordered the cake. He wanted to surprise you by acknowledging your relationship publicly. Isn't that romantic? All eyes turned to me. I shrugged, wearing my best innocent expression. I thought it was time everyone knew how close you and Corey have become. No point in keeping it a secret anymore, right? The crowd began to murmur, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. I saw Linda Patterson push through the group, her face set in hard lines. Corey, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet park, I think we need to have a conversation, now. What followed was the most spectacular public meltdown I'd ever witnessed. Linda confronted Corey about the affair, producing evidence she'd gathered, credit card statements, phone records, witness accounts. Samantha tried to deny everything, but the cake, the restaurant hostess, and the growing crowd of co-workers made denial impossible. Corey, faced with his wife's fury and his professional reputation in ruins, did what cowards always do. He tried to blame someone else. It wasn't my idea, he said desperately. She came on to me. She said her marriage was over anyway, that her husband was just a blue-collar nobody who didn't understand her needs. The crowd turned to look at me again, expecting me to explode, to fight, to make a scene. Instead, I just smiled. Well, I said conversationally, I guess we all learned something new today. I walked over to where Samantha stood frozen, her perfect facade finally cracked beyond repair. You know what the funny thing is, Sam? You were right about one thing. I am just a blue-collar nobody, but you forgot something important. What? She whispered. Blue-collar guys know how to build things. I gestured at the chaos around us, the ruined picnic, the destroyed reputations, the shattered relationships. And we know how to tear them down too. I turned and walked away, leaving my wife standing in the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. Behind me, I could hear the continued arguments, the shocked conversations, the sound of a small-town scandal being born. Tomorrow, the newspaper ad would run, and everyone in town would see my loving tribute to my faithful wife. The irony would be lost on no one. But tonight, I was going home to start the next chapter of my life. Alone, but not defeated. Never again defeated. I'd spent 8 years being underestimated. It felt good to finally prove everyone wrong. The last laugh, as it turned out, was mine.